Welcome to another episode of This Catholic Life. Conversations about life's ups and downs, big and small, how we deal with every situation imaginable, whatever life throws at us, but still manage to be sensible, practical, and joyful. Today's show is addiction. The issue of finding some kind of escape from life's problems or stresses in addictive behaviour, the chaos and harm this causes, and how to find hope when all seems hopeless. I'm your host, Peter Holmes, and today I'm joined by Chantale Ishac, who works with people working to overcome addiction and with their families. Welcome, Chantale.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
A pleasure. Before we get started, just a reminder that if you like the show, you should subscribe on your podcast app, and that way you won't miss an episode. Let's get into it. Now, when we talk about addiction, some of the more obvious things that would come to people's minds are things such as heroin, shooting up, drugs, these sorts of things. But that actually is a fairly big proportion of the addicts in Australia, but it's not all of them. And in fact, probably some of the more dangerous addictions begin with very mundane things. Perhaps you could begin, Chantale, by running us through some of the biggest dangers for the everyday person.
Oh, the sneaky silent danger is alcohol. Because It's so societally accepted, it's everywhere.
It's almost required though, isn't it? In some cases.
Yeah.
If you don't drink, you're a weirdo.
Yes. Yeah, so it's more questionable why you're not drinking rather than why you are drinking.
Yeah, and people seem to propose it. I mean, I remember, when I had my first breakup, people go, what you need is a good drink. You know, this is their solution to hard times or tough times or to make you feel so-called better.
Yeah.
So it seems to be an almost universal thing. In fact, escaping alcohol is more difficult than...
Yeah. And on the note of alcohol, just with the shift, there's a treatment centre that I work quite closely with, and beginning of the year, probably about 30% of people that would enter that facility would be for alcohol. Now about 95% are for alcohol.
Wow, that's a massive increase from 30 to 90%.
Yeah.
Wow. I wonder if that's... Now, I'm sort of probing a bit here, but because other addictions, you would get a meth, there's obviously a big one, those kinds of ones, but they're very visible. Like it's very... It's easier to spot, if you like, in someone's life when they're irregular behaviour, having to find illegal substances, that kind of thing. But alcohol's not illegal. Would you get at that centre non-substance addictions? For example, the addictions of gambling, pornography, other kinds of addictive behaviour?
Yeah, I love that you brought up gambling, for example. So we're the biggest population of gamblers in the world. We spend in the world.
You mean per capita?
In the world. I don't know if it's per capita, if it's per population, but our country spends the most in the world. So 24 billion. But now it's actually increased since isolation has happened and the quarantines have happened. About 67% increase. And we were already the largest. So gambling and that's in terms of online gambling. So the 67% increase. Yeah,
that's quite dangerous because I guess we're all stuck at home, and it's some of these things. Now, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I imagine that some of these things don't begin with great troubles, but they begin with boredom, and yet there's a kind of a thrill involved in a little win in gambling, or all the other things offer you a little bit of a hit. Is there a similarity between the addictions, or are they different types of things?
Yeah. So when you look at an addictive behaviour, it's great to just call it an addictive behavior, even if it is a substance or it's not a substance, because it's a habit that I can't break. I've tried to break and I can't break it, and it's causing me harm. So there have to be those two conditions for it to be an addictive behavior. I've tried to break it, I've tried to stop, and I can't. And the second characteristic is it's harming me in some way. So it could be gambling, could be pornography. We're looking behaviorally, we have process addictions. So it could be gaming, it could be anything that involves a process. So it's also eating disorders do come under addictions. So if I can't stop myself from purging and binging, etc., excessive exercising, any habit that I can't stop and it's harming me. So does it cause harm? If it's not causing harm, it's not an unhealthy habit. It's not an addiction.
Is that part of the problem, though, that the person involved in the behaviour has to come to the point where they understand that it's causing harm?
Yeah. Where they can actually see this is causing me harm. And that's why alcohol is sneaky. When you mention meth, when you have your obvious addictions, your really hard drugs, addictions that cause harm really quickly, really obviously, I personally think that's a blessing of an addiction because it is so obvious. You are compelled to do something about it or you will die. When you have your sneakier addictions, they don't cause as much obvious harm in the short term anyway.
Right. Yeah, well, alcohol is pretty destructive in the long term.
Yeah.
If anyone ever has a doubt about alcohol, all you have to do is go and see someone who's in the final stage of alcoholism and how destructive it can be to someone's health in particular. But gambling, for example, or pornography, or you mentioned gaming, that's a very interesting one. I don't know if you meant this, but computer gaming actually comes into addiction as well.
Yeah.
There was a study a long time ago now, it's almost a decade ago now, in the UK, which showed that about 11% of online gamers in the MMOs, in the online worlds, displayed at least the two signs of addiction that are necessary for diagnosis, like quite serious withdrawal behaviors and other neglect of other parts of their life. And also what was even more disturbing is that about 15% of the quickie online divorces listed gaming habits as their primary cause. And this is in the UK, but it's a pretty big percentage of divorces being attributed to an addictive behavior.
Yeah, definitely.
So the destruction isn't necessarily substance or health related. It expands a bit wider than that.
Yeah, because it's using the same part of your brain. It's using your reward system. So there's a distinction between when you have a physical dependency to a substance. So for example, we use alcohol. If I cease drinking, my body will detox from that substance. There is a physical dependency, but that's not the actual addiction. There's a psychological addiction, and that has to do with my brain. That has to do with my reward system. I'm used to dopamine, and I need to work with my brain. It's not just about the body.
Right. But even before that, there's a reason I went to that hit in the first place.
Definitely.
And so, for example, even though I might be used to getting my thrills, by the way, you can get your thrills as well from fear. So some people love horror movies because it gives them the same rush, the kind of hit. Also, a tiny amount of that substance comes from cheese.
Yes.
So
opiate receptors.
a good yes, that's right.
You like cheese? You'd love heroin.
Unfortunately, that is the case. But let's stick with the cheese. So this Catholic life does not endorse heroin use. So coming back to the addictive behaviours, usually we can identify the problems, and if we can get through the detox stage, we can get to a point where we don't need it anymore. But almost always there's an underlying cause, an underlying anxiety or stress or negativity, which sends us, if you like, looking back for that positive.
Yeah.
Would you say that's true of most addictions?
Oh, it's definite. It's not just true of most, it's definite. There was a study on something called ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. And they showed that the number of adverse childhood experiences a person would have, the more likely they would have an addiction.
Right.
So it's very connected to trauma.
And one of the things that comes up, at least in my very limited exposure to these things, is that people don't have to be aware that the childhood experience is affecting them for it to prompt addictive behavior. There can often be an underlying kind of angst and emptiness and the escape mechanisms, which they didn't even realize were being hardwired into them during their childhood.
Yeah.
Manifest in adulthood.
Yeah, and they don't even need to be aware of the adverse childhood experience itself. It could be a memory they cannot even recall consciously.
Right.
Yeah.
That's and in some cases it's not one specific memory, it's a whole range of experiences within a family setting or within another setting. It's quite a big thing. Now, in our cases, we're probably seeing more. I think you indicated you'd gone up to 90-something% in the alcohol use. That's got to do with our current situation and being locked in, but it's not just the inconvenience of being in the one house. It's going to be exacerbating other things, isn't it?
Yes. It's having to sit with ourselves and not have any distractions that our day-to-day usually gives us.
That's profound. So we normally have all kinds of things distracting us during the day, particularly work.
Yeah.
So we have friends, we have work, we can maybe go out with people, watch the footy, and when all that wasn't on, and we're just forced to be alone with our thoughts. Wow. Yeah, well, it certainly messed me around in this time.
Not just our thoughts. Our thoughts are a consequence. What's behind the thoughts is the sensations we're feeling in our bodies. And that sensation you mentioned earlier of boredom, of loneliness, of discontent.
What's so bad about boredom, do you think, that we have to run away from it?
The way I see boredom is that we have a stigma around the word loneliness. And instead of being able to consciously see that I feel lonely, I call it boredom because that's what I truly believe I'm feeling. But boredom is really just a disconnection with myself. If I was feeling really connected and not lonely, I could sit in silence and stare at a white wall and find beauty in that white wall.
So if I'm comfortable and confident and at peace in myself, then being alone with myself is okay.
There's no such thing as boredom. It doesn't exist.
Wow. Okay. Now we have to explore this. I'm sorry. We're going to put the other stuff aside and go here, because now it's quite clear that we need to find peace with ourselves, but if so many of us are bored, I always thought that the electronic age was making us into this people who couldn't be alone, because we literally can't sit for 2 seconds on a train or at a home without pulling the phone out or switching on a telly or turning some music on or something. And I think I've mentioned once before in the podcast, Alanis Morissette has a line in one of her songs where she says, "Why are you so petrified of silence? Here, can you handle this?" Yeah. And then she has silence. And then she says, "Did you think about your bills, your ex, or your deadlines, or when you think you're going to die, or did you long for the next distraction?" It's a great line in the sense of the longing for the next distraction. We kind of, oh my goodness, I have to think. Is there, and that's just triggered another memory in me, is there an addiction to eating?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
One of you might know Jim Gaffigan, the comedian, but he jokes about overeating and the American problem. And he basically has this line, I'm eating, it's either that or feel my feelings.
Yeah.
There's a kind of it's an avoidance behavior in itself.
Yeah. And not only is it avoiding feeling feelings, and so I'm going to eat, it can also be that feeling of hunger that we have a very low tolerance for. So we can't tolerate that feeling of hunger. So I need to get rid of that.
So we can't wait.
Yeah. So it's a feeling you actually feel physiologically. It's a hunger feeling. And it's not real because you're satiated. There's enough nutrients in your body. But it is a sensation.
Yes, especially in the Western world.
There is a sensation.
We're not going to starve.
And we can't sit with it. It's I can't sit with this feeling. I need to feel it. I need to feel it.
Now, I have a question for you, and my children are going to be listening to this now. I continually tell them that they shouldn't binge watch TV shows, that they should only watch 1 or 2 episodes and then wait for a period of time. And I use the term delayed gratification, meaning it's a great thing to delay your next enjoyment, because it teaches you the cycle of life, and it actually teaches you to regulate it. Because if you binge everything, my dad used to say, he who feasts every day feasts no day.
Yeah.
In fact, if you're constantly binging stuff, it no longer has any pleasure for you. It no longer has any value. So you have to keep going looking for new thrills. So is that, the whole instant culture that we've developed, is that contributing, do you think, to this?
Yes, definitely. So when I work with my clients, we go through an entire program. And one of the sections in that program is looking at characteristics we have when we have addictive personalities. And I used to say, this one was on instant gratification. I used to say this was quite common with people with addictive personalities, but today it's common in absolutely everybody because it has nothing to do with addiction anymore. It's our society. You don't need to cook a meal anymore.
Right.
You can just call Uber Eats. You don't need to wait 1 week for your favorite series to show what's coming up. You can watch the entire series in a day.
On Netflix, yeah.
We're so wired now for that instant gratification, and it's so important to create a habit of delayed gratification. There was a study done in, and this is also one of our parts of the program where we look at a study they did in Stanford many, many years ago. You've probably heard of it because I saw there was something going on. I don't know if it was TikTok or one of those little fads that came out where they were giving kids chocolates and they were saying, don't eat the chocolate until I come back, and recording it. And I'm like, do they realize they're doing the marshmallow experiment, which is a really famous psychology experiment?
Yes, it is.
And it was,
well, perhaps for our listener, we should explain that a little bit. The marshmallow experiment is where they put a marshmallow in front of a kid on a plate, and they say, you can either eat that now straight away, or you can wait, I think it's 10, 15 minutes, And then if you haven't eaten it by then, you can have 2.
Yes.
And some of them had started eating it before they'd even heard the sentence out. But it's a very important thing because the results of the study were intriguing. Those who had not eaten it immediately and had waited, there was some, maybe you can fill us in on those results.
1 in 3 were able to not eat the marshmallow by the age of 4. So there was a set of 4-year-olds that they did this study on, and 1 in 3 were able to delay gratification. 2 out of 3 couldn't.
So they had the self-control there, didn't they, to do that? Now, what was intriguing, though, was that they went on, and in the future studies that we could see that they actually were very successful in life because they had that ability.
Correlation, Peter. Like, this flips me out. You don't get a 100% correlation in anything. So 100% of the 1 in 3 were successful in their lives. And I don't mean just monetarily, in their goals, be it relationships, family. They were succeeding 100%.
Well, it makes sense when you think about it, though, because you're not going to succeed in a relationship if you get gratification, snap. If you say today was crap, I'm leaving, then basically you've lost the relationships. You've lost all hope of success in a job. All of those things don't work out for you. You've got to have a long-term goal, and you've got to have a focus on working towards long-term gratification in these things. Otherwise, it's just the whole world falls apart. So what are the steps then? We obviously need to find peace in ourselves. We need to find the calm enough to come to that point. What would you say in terms of, let's say I want to find that peace. I'm sitting at home with COVID, and I want to find a way to be at peace with my own company and be comfortable. So how would I start out?
The very first thing is know that whatever you are feeling, you can handle it. Your feelings can't hurt you. They're just feelings. They will pass.
So feelings themselves are not a danger.
They're not a danger.
You can actually have them, and they're just there. Then they don't say anything good or bad about you. You just have feelings.
We're taught how to care for our physical health. We're taught how to look after our spiritual health. We're taught how to, brush your teeth, wash your hair, etc., etc. Nobody teaches us how to look after our emotional health and process feelings.
Right. All right. So it's one thing for me to say it's okay to have feelings. What do I do now?
Have you ever watched a tennis match? Yeah?
Oh, don't. I'm not a tennis fan, but go on.
They say we have 75,000 thoughts a day. And somewhere I read they said that we have 12,000 emotions, but we have our favorite 7. Not 7,000, but just 7 that we like to cycle through.
Wow.
But if we're just aware of the fact that emotions and thoughts are not us. It's like clothing. It's not your body. It's something that you were experiencing. It's something that you were observing. It's something that you were feeling. It is not yourself. Just knowing that puts you in a really stable, firm place. I'm experiencing this feeling that's coming up. I'm observing these thoughts that I'm having. Don't believe them. I like to say emotions have no brains. They're dopey. Yeah.
They don't.
They're dopey.
They affect your brains, but they don't have any rationality in themselves.
Incredibly uncomfortable. And this is where therapy does help. When you work with a professional who teaches you how to go, probably where we can't go too much depth in the podcast, where you can go a lot deeper with a therapist in how to actually process these feelings. One thing that I would just put out there for everybody, the strongest thing is knowing that you are not your thoughts and you are not your feelings. And if you look at your feelings as though they are clouds, so they can come and visit, it's like the weather. And it's going to pass. It's not permanent. It's not the sky. That helps.
And they might rain on you a bit, but it won't hurt.
If it's raining, I may not like rain. I don't need to like the emotion, but it's going to pass. And I was drinking a cup of tea a couple of years ago, and I was blowing on the tea to cool it down. And I noticed as I was blowing on the tea was hitting the rim of the mug and it was coming back at me. And I thought, isn't that a perfect analogy for what we do with our feelings? You just push it away, it's going to keep coming back. You push it away, it'll keep coming back.
And they keep coming back, yes. I have one of these weird personalities, Chantale, that I can delay. Like if an emotion overtakes me, I can go, that's not convenient right now. I put it aside. But if I don't actually set some time aside to work it through, just sit and let it happen, then it bites me. Like in a week's time or something, if I haven't dealt with it, if I've forgotten about it, it'll come back and bite me, even if I've forgotten why I was feeling the emotion in the first place. And you've got to set aside time. Like you said with your health, you've got to set aside time to let stuff cycle through. It might actually be something to do with sleeping patterns too, because if you're not giving yourself the time to allow your brain to defrag, I was going to use a computer term there, but to kind of undo all of the chaos that's happened through the day, then your brain's still trying to do it when you're trying to go to sleep. And that's not going to be helping you. We might want to briefly talk about, there are several layers we've talked about today. There's sort of a counseling layer, which is sort of, there's a bit of a soft line there between counseling and therapy, and lots of good people you can contact to talk about that kind of layer. Talking to friends obviously is a good starting point, but obviously if you're not comfortable with that, seek out someone who's trained in that area, and they can give you a good positive direction, and they can refer you on if there's a therapy need. In terms of actual substance abuses, the detox and rehab centers around the place are quite good at helping people. They have to want to help themselves in there somewhere. And what I'd like to ask you, though, let's say it's not me. Let's say it's a friend. How can I support that friend? How can I firstly help them come to get help? And how can I help them while they are getting help? Because most people don't know what to do, so they just back off. And they say, I was just giving you space, man. I was just giving you space. But really, is that the best thing for helping people?
Understanding that your friend is in a life-threatening crisis at the moment, and their addiction is their best way to cope. It's keeping them alive, while at the same time it's slow suicide. So they need intervention. They need assistance. If we turn a blind eye, we're turning a blind eye to someone's slow suicide. And what they're doing, although it is quite harmful, it is the mind thinking, this is what's keeping me alive for now. It's helping them survive the emotional pain that they may or may not be even aware of. So if we have that understanding, we can approach them so much more appropriately, where we're not vilifying their actions. We're realizing that this is desperation to survive.
Yeah.
So we come from that place of compassion.
There's a stigma thing there too, isn't there? And a lot of people have told me that once they ask for help, and they're like in any kind of formal help, like they've gone to therapy or they've gone to detox or something like that, people around them, they still treat them nicely, but they treat them as if there's some other person now. There's a kind of a stigma attached to it, which means that or maybe we just think there's a stigma, and that stops people from approaching the help.
I think we think there's a stigma because that has not been my experience or with my clients. If anything, we're seen as superheroes. They're saying, wow, you've conquered that. Yeah. There's a 3% success rate with overcoming addictions in the world, Peter.
In the world.
If you are in that 3%, you're a superhero. You're an absolute superhero.
Wow. One thing to mention there is that often addictions it's not just a one-shot win, because once a pattern of behavior has been established, especially if it's a chemical pattern like alcohol or something like that, an alcoholic can't go back to what we would call normal or prior the addiction, because any alcohol's not going to be great from then on. So that it's a whole life change. And someone is always an alcoholic, but they're simply dry, or they're successful in beating that. Is it different for Catholics? I mean, for you as a Catholic counsellor, is that different? And the next question is, what about the clients? Is it different for you if the client says they're Catholic or believes they're Catholic?
When I work with clients, generally the program, cut and dry, looks like a very secular program. So it uses a range of different modalities from different schools of therapy. However, if you look at the foundation, it's very Catholic. It's looking at the dignity of the human person. You are valuable. You are worthy. Why are we harming ourselves? And when we look at why we are harming ourselves, there are some unconscious beliefs of self-loathing, of unworthiness, of I don't have any value. And these are beliefs we've picked up in childhood. So when a person comes in, and if they don't have a faith, and they don't want to have a faith, we don't even go down that route. And keeping it down a very secular program, it's Catholic without it being said that it's Catholic. If you look at that.
Well, that's the best kind of Catholic in the sense of dealing with this kind of thing, because your assumptions are the dignity of every human person, the image of God. And yet that doesn't need to be said for you to care and love and work with that assumption.
But then you'll have clients who are either Catholic or they have a strong faith in God. Yeah, a strong faith in God. So they might be Muslim, or so if I even think in my current group of clients, I have several devout Catholics. I have several devout Muslims, and I have a couple of atheists. So
right.
There's a particular module we do, which I call the diamond. If a person was Catholic, we don't even need to do the module on the diamond. Yeah, we wouldn't even need to, because the diamond is saying, remember who you are. Who are you? Yeah, so by taking away spiritual frame points to make it more accessible for others, I've called it the diamond exercise. If they already had that framework, that belief in God, that connection, we don't need to even do this exercise, because it's basically reminding the person who you actually are. And probably to explain it,
provided of course they have a solid and healthy understanding of their faith, because often the doubts come from family, and we learn a lot of our religious understanding from family anyway.
And part of it is going, if you are the diamond, everything outside the diamond are little gemstones, they're little pebbles. So, and the way that we get to this is pretty cheeky. So they don't even know they're doing the diamond exercises. We say, what are 5 characteristics you have? And they'll tell me 5 characteristics. What are 5 talents? What are 5 interests? What, et cetera, et cetera. So this is being, who is Peter? And they'll tell me all these things about who Peter is. And then I'll draw these outside the diamond, and then I'll be like, I'm sorry, but that's not who Peter is. And I'm like, what do you mean that's not who Peter is? And I'll say, there's characteristics, there is talents, but that's not who Peter is. And I'll go, that's who Peter is. Because when he was in his mother's womb, he didn't have those talents. He didn't have those characteristics. He didn't have those interests. When he was 15, he had different interests and characteristics and talents. Was that not Peter back then? When he's 80, he'll have different talents, interests. So when we make it so visual, who are you? You're that unchangeable thing in the middle. And all the rest is in a constant state of flux. And then the next layer is how valuable is that thing in the middle? How valuable is that diamond? And then we do the story of and love clears our vision. And generally we lack self-love. So we use a little...
I was going to say self-love seems to be the biggest thing, doesn't
it?
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. We can help, now nothing can ever be certain, but we can help addiction-proof those around us by constantly telling them what they're worth, by constantly being positive, especially children.
Oh, yes, 100%. For somebody that hasn't yet developed an addiction, there are so many things we can do to prevent this. So many. So constantly letting a child know how much they are loved and how valuable they are, and that it also has nothing to do with how others see them. So from our Catholic faith, in the eyes of God, I formed you in the palm of my hand. Geez, you probably are better with giving all the biblical references with how valuable.
No, that's beautiful. I'm just smiling because it's absolutely what I wanted to hear. I mean, honestly, if you want to talk about the future of your own children, go out there and hug them and tell them they are worth everything, not for something they've done, not because they've done a chore, but because of who they are. And that self-worth that they know, and it's long after their parents are gone, they know who they are because their parents have given them love and loved them unconditionally.
And
in that sense.
Peter research backs this up. There's a book by Morgan Scott Peck called The Road Less Traveled, and he talks about delayed gratification in the very first chapter and how it's developed in childhood. And there are 3 factors. One is role modeling, another one is safety and security, and the third one is love. And the most powerful of the 3 is always love, even if the first 2 are lacking.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, when the John Paul II Institute for Marriage and Family opened in Melbourne, one of the keynote speakers was a statistician who wasn't Catholic. And we said, why are you here? And he said, because he works for the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and every single category they measure, a child is better off, more successful, less likely to have the negatives if they've had a mother and a father who are together and love them. It's just an undeniable statistic, and more than a statistic, it's true. Because these are the way, parents are the way in which God's love is communicated to us, and our affirmation, the more successful they are at communicating that love, the less likely we are to believe the lies that we're worthless. And there's no one out there who's worthless.
Exactly.
So I guess a good way to finish up and to wrap up this particular message is that if you're listening to this, then you're a human person. And that means you have an unlimited dignity and an unlimited value. What other people have said and done to you is irrelevant to that dignity. I mean, it's obviously hurtful and there's all sorts of other experiences that come from that, but the dignity itself is invaluable. There's nothing that can buy you or there's nothing that can take that away. Finding that reality is our task. It's the way we come to peace with ourselves. And I would strongly recommend, I knew Chantale because I've seen her work at a distance, I must admit, but I've been watching her do good work for how long is it now with that with your current group?
I've been working in the addiction recovery space for over a decade now.
Wow. So 10 years in that space, and clearly there's much more work to be done in affirming people and working with people who have temporarily succumbed to the terrible binding of addictions. We need to remember that this is not ever a defeat. While there's life, there's hope, and there's always an improvement that can happen. I want to say thank you, Chantale, for coming and talking to us about this. In particular, hearing of your successes is amazing. And also when you might think nobody watches your videos, I don't know, but the videos that come up on LinkedIn and other things like that, they're quite helpful for all of us, not just those who are struggling with this. So before we go, I should ask if there's someone out there feeling that weight of their own troubles and their own lack of peace, but also in terms of struggling with some kind of addictive behavior, where would they go?
Well, definitely reach out. So Chantale Marie over here, you can just reach out to us. Also go to your GP. If you require a detox, that is a bit different to a rehabilitation centre to detox off that. If you find that you're in a lot of distress and this can't wait, immediately call Lifeline or even call an ambulance. If you do feel that sense of immediacy, there is always help 24/7 around the clock everywhere. So Lifeline, Beyond Blue, they're your general mental health services. You want something a bit more specific for addiction recovery, you have some free support groups. They're not necessarily intensive counselling, but you have Hello Sunday Morning. If you want to look them up, they're free group support. You get some emails and they can help you hold yourself accountable. If you want specific therapy, reach out for an addictions therapist. That is what our company specializes in. I would not be going to a general therapist for addictions. The therapy does differ quite significantly. Residential treatment is also brilliant for those that do require residential. The longer you stay in residential, the better your outcomes. And also, it can take several tries in different treatment facilities for it to stick. Don't give up. Keep trying. It is worth it.
Yep. You've not lost until you've given up. That's absolutely never give up. We're going to ask Chantale for all those links and we'll put them all in the show notes for this show. So check them out there. They'll be there permanently on this show. That's it for this week's podcast. If today's discussion got you thinking or arguing with your podcast device, let us know. You can subscribe to the podcast at thiscatholiclife.com.au. You can tell us what you liked, what you didn't like. Check us out on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or Discord. Write us a review on iTunes and help other people find the podcast. It's a uniquely Australian Catholic podcast, and we think that's an idea worth getting behind. So tell your friends. Before we go, have you got a shout out, Chantale?
Shout out to everybody that's thinking that they might have a habit and they're not sure if this is the right time. This is the right time. Do something about it.
Nice. I want to shout out to my family who constantly in my face, constantly demanding things of me, constantly reminding me of when I've worked too hard. Workaholism is my drug. Constantly calling me to account for that purpose. And as annoying and as wonderful as you are, you save me in so many ways. Thank you very much. That's all for now. Thank you for listening to This Catholic Life.
Thank you.